maximum set a wing of Eastridge Correctional Facility operated like clockwork. But for Marcus Reynolds and Damon Wilson, this rigid environments and disciplinary issues among participants. In the narrow window between dinner and lockdown, Marcus and Damon would sit at a corner table in the recreation room, sometimes simply talking, other times playing cards. During yard time, they walked the perimeter together. These small rituals established them as a recognized pair within the prison's social hierarchy. For nearly 14 months, their relationship appeared stable. Marcus displayed uncharacteristic patience and even gentleness with Damon. Damon, in turn, showed loyalty and provided emotional support during Marcus's failed appeal and a denied parole hearing. The first signs of trouble emerged gradually. Corrections officers noted increased agitation in Marcus during the spring of 2020. His disciplinary record, previously unremarkable, began accumulating minor infractions. Insubordination, unauthorized movement, contraband possession. Reynolds started getting edgy, a guard later recalled, more territorial, watching Wilson all the time. It was subtle at first, but anyone working the blocks long enough could see the change. The surveillance was initially dismissed as typical possessiveness, common enough in prison relationships where control often substitutes for trust. However, as weeks passed, Marcus's behavior intensified. During meals, he began positioning himself to maintain visual contact with Damon. He altered his work schedule in the laundry facility to align with Damon's movements. Prison records indicate 3 separate incidents where Marcus confronted other inmates who had engaged in extended conversations with Damon. None escalated to physical violence, but witnesses described the encounters as intense and threatening. Marcus thought he owned Damon, another inmate later testified. Couldn't handle seeing them talk to nobody else. It was getting weird, even for this place. Damon's response to this increasing surveillance appeared ambivalent. Some witnesses described efforts to reassure Marcus. Others recalled seeing Damon deliberately engaging with other inmates when Marcus was present, seemingly testing boundaries or asserting independence. This push-pull dynamic continued for approximately 3 months, with the relationship visibly deteriorating. Marcus became increasingly isolated, interacting almost exclusively with Damon and withdrawing from previous associations. Damon, conversely, expanded social connections, particularly with a group of inmates who gathered in the recreation yard. On June 12, 2020, the fragile equilibrium shattered. Security footage from that date shows Damon entering the cell of another inmate during an unauthorized period. The cell belonged to a recent transfer, a younger man serving his first sentence for financial fraud. Marcus, working his shift in the laundry facility, was unaware of the meeting. However, as in most prisons, information travels with remarkable efficiency. By that evening, multiple sources confirmed that Marcus had learned of the encounter. Surveillance footage from the dining hall shows an intense but whispered exchange between Marcus and Damon, ending with Damon walking away and Marcus remaining seated, motionless, for several minutes. Over the next 72 hours, their interactions ceased entirely. Damon was observed spending time with a new inmate and other associates. Marcus remained isolated, declining even to leave his cell for some meals. Behavior flagged in the daily reports but deemed insufficient for intervention. On June 15, a corrections officer noted in the daily log that Marcus requested an unscheduled shower period, citing contamination from a laundry chemical spill. The request was granted, a seemingly minor deviation from protocol that would later be scrutinized in multiple internal investigations. The Eastridge shower facilities occupy a tiled room divided into 6 individual stalls with waist-high partitions and no doors, offering minimal privacy while allowing guards visual access during their regular patrols. The schedule allocates shower access by cell block, with strict time limits enforced. On the afternoon of June 15, Damon entered the shower area during D Block's designated period. According to the facility's records, 6 other inmates were present initially, but 5 had finished and departed by 2:47 p.m., leaving Damon alone. The guard responsible for monitoring had stepped away to respond to a disturbance in an adjacent corridor. At 2:53 p.m., Marcus entered the shower area, ostensibly for his approved unscheduled shower. Surveillance footage from the corridor shows him entering empty-handed. The shower area itself had no cameras, a security gap repeatedly identified in previous facility audits but never addressed due to budget constraints. What happened next was reconstructed through forensic evidence and partial witness accounts. Marcus approached Damon in the shower stall furthest from the entrance. No verbal exchange was overheard by the one remaining inmate, who was finishing dressing near the exit. The attack was swift and methodical. Using a prison-made weapon, a toothbrush with a razor blade melted into the handle, Marcus stabbed Damon multiple times in the neck and upper torso. The medical examiner would later identify 17 distinct wounds, with the fatal injury severing the carotid artery. The other inmate, hearing the struggle, exited the shower area without raising an alarm, a decision he later justified as self-preservation. You don't get involved, you don't see nothing, that's how you survive. It was 3:07 p.m. when the guard returned and discovered Damon's body. Blood had spread across the tiled floor, diluted by the still-running shower. Marcus was gone, having returned to his assigned work detail in the laundry, where he resumed his duties as if nothing had occurred. The facility immediately implemented lockdown procedures. All inmates were confined to their cells as a team of state investigators arrived at the scene. The shower area was secured, though valuable evidence had already been compromised by the running water and delayed discovery. Damon was pronounced dead at the scene. The body, still partially clothed in prison-issued shower sandals and shorts, was photographed extensively before removal. Blood spatter analysis later indicated that the attack had been frontal, the assailant facing the victim, and that Damon had been conscious and struggling for at least the initial stab wounds. The investigation moved quickly from an open inquiry to a focused case. Marcus's unscheduled shower, his documented history with the victim, and the deteriorating relationship made him an immediate person of interest. His cell was searched within hours of the murder. Inside a small gap in the concrete wall, concealed behind a carefully positioned photograph, investigators discovered the weapon. Blood residue, despite obvious cleaning attempts, matched Damon's DNA. Additional blood traces were found on a pair of shower sandals hidden beneath Marcus's mattress. When confronted with the evidence, Marcus offered no resistance or denial. "He shouldn't have disrespected me," he reportedly told the investigators, refusing to elaborate further or provide a formal statement without representation. As the investigation expanded, a more complex picture emerged of both the relationship and the institutional environment that contained it. Interviews with other inmates revealed that Damon's interactions with the new inmate had indeed become sexual in nature, a fact widely known throughout the facility. Damon was playing a dangerous game, one long-term inmate explained. Everyone could see it. You don't disrespect someone like Marcus in here and think there won't be consequences. But Damon wanted to prove something, that they couldn't be controlled, that they had choices even in here. The prison administration faced difficult questions about the supervision failures that had allowed the murder to occur. The unscheduled shower approval, the guard's absence from his post, and the unmonitored area all represented institutional breakdowns. Internal memos uncovered during the investigation revealed that staff had documented concerns about Marcus's behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder. One counselor had specifically noted obsessive tendencies and possible delusional jealousy in a report filed just 10 days before the killing. The report had been reviewed but deemed insufficient to warrant intervention or separation. The case never went to public trial. Marcus accepted a plea agreement, receiving a life sentence without possibility of parole for first-degree murder. The weapon, the premeditation evidenced by the requested shower time, and the brutality of the attack left little room for mitigating factors. For Eastridge Correctional Facility, the murder triggered a comprehensive security review. Cameras were finally installed in shower areas, albeit with privacy modifications. Policies regarding relationship monitoring and intervention were strengthened. 3 staff members, including the supervisor who approved the unscheduled shower, were terminated for negligence. Damon's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the state's Department of Corrections, citing negligence and failure to protect. The case settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. As part of the settlement, the department agreed to review and enhance its policies regarding transgender inmates, including improved screening processes for potential threats. The facility's LGBTQ inmate support group, which neither Marcus nor Damon had participated in, saw its membership double in the months following the murder. The group's coordinator, a civilian contractor, reported that the tragedy had prompted many inmates to seek community and safe discussion spaces they had previously avoided. The murder at Eastridge Correctional Facility represents more than just another statistic in America's prison violence epidemic. It illuminates the complex intersections of identity, desire, control, and institutional failure within a system designed for punishment rather than rehabilitation. For Marcus and Damon, prison became not just a place of confinement, but a crucible that concentrated and intensified human emotions to deadly effect. their relationship beginning in mutual need, evolving through genuine connection and ending in violence, followed a trajectory shaped by both personal psychology and institutional constraints. What might have developed differently in another context became, within prison walls, a fatal equation of possession, jealousy, and revenge. The surveillance cameras, guard rotations, and security protocols that governed their physical movements proved wholly inadequate to manage the volatile emotions that ultimately led to murder. As one investigating officer noted in his final report, "The system is designed to control bodies, not hearts or minds. That's where it always breaks down." Today, nearly 5 years after the murder, Marcus remains in solitary confinement at a different maximum security facility. Damon's personal effects, a few photographs, letters, and handmade jewelry crafted from permitted materials, were returned to family members who had maintained only sporadic contact during incarceration. In the shower area at Eastridge, new tiling has replaced the blood-stained originals. New cameras monitor from discrete ceiling mounts. New policies govern inmate movements and relationships. Yet beneath these surface changes, the same fundamental tensions persist. Human needs and emotions contained within a system ill-designed to accommodate them. The tragic end of Marcus and Damon's relationship stands as a stark reminder of this unresolved contradiction. A single case illustrating broader truths about punishment, identity, and the human capacity for both connection and destruction, even in the most controlled environments. At Ravencrest Penitentiary, a relationship between Andre Collins and Terrell Jackson would take root, flourish briefly, and ultimately end in blood. From the outside, Ravencrest resembled a massive gray fortress, its perimeter defined by 30-foot walls topped with spirals of razor wire that gleamed like deadly tinsel in the sunlight. Guard towers punctuated each corner, staffed by officers armed with shotguns and binoculars. Beyond the main entry checkpoint, the facility was organized into 8 housing blocks, each containing 120 cells arranged in 2 tiers. In this rigidly controlled environment, time passed according to institutional rhythms. Wake-up calls at 5:30 a.m., meals at precisely scheduled intervals, recreation periods portioned out like rare commodities, and lights out at 10 p.m. Yet within these mechanical constraints, human connections formed, as inevitable and unpredictable as water finding cracks in concrete. Andre Collins arrived at Ravencrest in January 2019, sentenced to 20 years for armed robbery and aggravated assault. At 35, Andre had spent nearly half his life cycling through the criminal justice system, juvenile detention, county lockups, state facilities. The pattern had become almost ritualistic: incarceration, release, brief freedom, return. Standing 6'2" with broad shoulders and arms covered in tattoos chronicling his interrupted life, Andre projected physical confidence that commanded immediate respect in the prison hierarchy. Yet those who interacted with him noted an unexpected stillness, a quality of watchful patience rare in a place where aggression was often the default language. Collins keeps to himself, follows rules, doesn't cause trouble, one guard noted in an early evaluation. Potential model inmate if he maintains current behavior. 4 months after Andre's arrival, Terrell Jackson was transferred to Ravencrest from a medium security facility following a system-wide redistribution of inmates. At 29, Terrell was serving a 12-year sentence for narcotics distribution, already 5 years into the term. Where Andre was physically imposing, Terrell was slight, standing barely 5'9" with a slender build. Where Andre was reserved, Terrell was expressive, known for a disarming smile that seemed incongruous with their surroundings. And where Andre's presentation was conventionally masculine, Terrell identified openly as a transgender woman. Despite being housed in a male facility, Terrell's transfer documentation included notes about gender identity, with recommendations for specific accommodations that Ravencrest struggled to implement consistently. Within the limited options available, Terrell maintained feminine grooming standards: shaped eyebrows, short but styled hair, subtle adaptations to the standard uniform. Jackson requires additional monitoring for safety concerns, read the intake assessment. Previous facility reports indicate vulnerability to targeted harassment. Their first interaction occurred in the prison library, a small but carefully maintained space overseen by a civilian employee who prided herself on creating what she called an island of normalcy within the facility. Andre had secured a coveted position as a library assistant, responsible for reshelving books and maintaining the simple catalog system. Terrell began visiting the library during B Block's designated hours, initially browsing fashion magazines and contemporary fiction. Security footage from these early encounters shows brief, seemingly casual interactions. Books passed, shelving explained, catalog consulted. For 3 weeks, these encounters remained professional and limited. Then, as documented in the library's sign-in logs, Terrell began arriving earlier in the scheduled period and staying longer. Surveillance footage captured conversations extending beyond library matters, though the content remained unrecorded. By the 6th week of Terrell's transfer, other inmates had noted the connection. Prison social dynamics react quickly to new alliances, particularly those that cross the usual tribal boundaries of race, criminal history, or prison occupation. Everyone could see something was happening there, one inmate later told investigators. Collins had never paid special attention to anyone before. Then suddenly he's spending every library shift talking to Jackson. And here, that's like taking out a billboard announcement. The prison grapevine, always efficient, circulated various theories about their relationship. Some dismissed it as a business arrangement, protection in exchange for commissary items or other services. Others recognized the emotional component devised correspondence, with disciplinary reports filed for both parties. However, the senior officer on duty, a 20-year veteran of the corrections system, made a rare exception. "I've seen what happens when you disrupt these arrangements," he later explained off the record. "Sometimes the stability they provide prevents worse problems." Collins was behaving. Jackson was safer than before. The letter went back where I found it. This unofficial sanction, or at least tolerance, allowed the relationship to develop further, though always constrained by the realities of incarceration. Physical contact remained limited to brief touches during meal periods or recreation time. Privacy was non-existent. Their emotional intimacy had to exist primarily through conversations in monitored spaces and carefully exchanged notes. For nearly 8 months, the relationship appeared to provide mutual benefits. Andre experienced a reduction in disciplinary incidents, channeling his focus into protecting Terrell and maintaining his library position. Terrell found a measure of safety in a dangerous environment and emotional connection in a place designed to prevent it. Corrections officers informally acknowledged the arrangement, sometimes assigning the two to the same work details or recreation periods, not out of support for the relationship, but recognition of its stabilizing effects on both inmates. "You learn to work with the reality in front of you," a supervising officer later testified. Collins and Jackson weren't causing problems. That's rare enough that you don't interfere without good reason. The first significant strain appeared in March 2020, when the facility implemented distancing protocols. Library services were suspended. Recreation periods were staggered to reduce crowding. Meals were delivered to cells rather than served in the communal dining hall. These measures, while medically necessary, severely limited contact between inmates housed in different blocks. Andre and Terrell, assigned to A Block and B Block respectively, suddenly found themselves separated by more than just cell walls. Their primary meeting locations were no longer accessible. Communication channels narrowed to occasional glimpses during modified movement periods, and notes passed through the increasingly valuable network of inmate messengers. Prison records indicate that Andre's behavior changed during this period of separation. His previously exemplary work performance declined. He received citations for being out of authorized areas, always locations that might allow visual contact with B Block. His formerly quiet demeanor shifted toward irritability. Collins is expressing frustration with restrictions, noted a counselor's report. Recommend monitoring for potential escalation. When limited inter-block recreation resumed in June 2020, security footage captured their reunion, a brief conversation in the yard, standing closer than social distancing guidelines permitted, speaking intently for the entire 30-minute period. However, the 3 months of separation had created space for change. According to multiple accounts, Terrell had formed new associations during the restricted period, particularly with a group of younger inmates recently transferred from another facility. Records from the post-restriction period show Terrell increasingly dividing social time between Andre and the new group. Surveillance footage captures extended conversations between Terrell and Calvin during meals and recreation periods, sometimes within Andre's line of sight. "You could feel the tension building," recalled an inmate who shared a work assignment with Andre. "Collins would just stop whatever he was doing and stare across the yard when Jackson was talking to these other inmates, not saying anything, just watching, getting darker every day. On August 17, 2020, a critical incident occurred in the laundry facility where both Andre and Terrell had recently been assigned. According to the official report, Andre confronted Terrell about the relationship with Calvin, leading to a heated exchange witnessed by at least 4 other inmates. No physical altercation took place, but the verbal intensity prompted staff intervention and temporary reassignment of both inmates to separate work details. During a subsequent cell search, officers discovered a makeshift weapon in Andre's mattress, a toothbrush with its end melted and embedded with a razor blade, a common prison weapon. While Andre denied knowledge of the item, the discovery resulted in 2 weeks of disciplinary segregation. Upon return to the general population in early September, Andre initially appeared calmer. He resumed his previous routines, regained library privileges as COVID restrictions continued easing, and made no attempts to contact Terrell directly. This apparent acceptance was misinterpreted by both staff and fellow inmates. What appeared as resignation was instead calculated withdrawal. Andre was planning. The truth about what happened during those 2 weeks in segregation emerged only after subsequent events. Andre's cellmate during that period later revealed that Andre had spent hours silently staring at the wall, occasionally murmuring the same phrase, "Can't let it happen again." The cryptic statement referenced a pattern in Andre's life, abandonment and betrayal, that had defined his relationships since childhood. Court psychologists had previously documented this trauma response in evaluations conducted during his earlier convictions. For Andre, Terrell's perceived rejection was triggering a psychological response far more complex than simple jealousy. All maximum security prisons contain blind spots, areas where surveillance cameras have limited coverage or where architectural features create shadowed zones. At Ravencrest, one such area was the corner of the recreation yard, where an equipment shed created a triangular space partially obscured from both camera coverage and direct line of sight from the guard posts. This surveillance gap was well known to long-term inmates, who referred to it as the blind spot. It was typically used for quick contraband exchanges or brief private conversations. Using this area for extended periods invited staff attention, but momentary occupation rarely triggered concern. On September 28, 2020, recreation period logs show that Andre, Terrell, and Calvin were all present in the yard during B Block's scheduled time. Andre had obtained permission to retrieve materials from the groundskeeping shed, an errand that legitimately placed him in the yard during a period when he would normally be restricted to his cell block. Surveillance footage captures Andre entering the yard at 2:17 p.m., acknowledging the supervising officer and proceeding to the equipment shed. At 2:19 p.m., Terrell is seen separating from a group of inmates and walking toward the same area. Calvin remained with the group, engaged in a basketball game. What transpired next occurred in the surveillance gap. The equipment shed camera had been reported malfunctioning 3 days earlier, with replacement parts still pending. The nearest functional camera captured only Andre's entry into the blind spot and, 4 minutes later, his exit alone. At 2:26 p.m., an inmate discovered Terrell's body behind the equipment shed. Emergency response protocols were immediately activated, but medical personnel pronounced Terrell dead at the scene. The cause of death was multiple stab wounds to the neck and torso, with the fatal injury penetrating the heart. Ravencrest immediately implemented facility-wide lockdown. All inmates were returned to their cells as state investigators and the medical examiner arrived. The crime scene was secured, though crucial minutes had elapsed between the murder and discovery. The weapon, a sharpened steel rod fashioned from a piece of bed frame, was found discarded in a trash receptacle 30 yards from the scene. Despite evident wiping, blood residue in the metal's grooves matched Terrell's DNA. Andre, returned to his cell during the lockdown, made no attempt to conceal his involvement when investigators questioned him 3 hours later. His statement, recorded in the case file, was chilling in its emotional detachment. Had to be done. Some things you can't let stand. Not in here. The investigation revealed the full dimension of what had triggered the murder. In the days preceding the killing, Terrell and Calvin had escalated their relationship from friendship to romantic involvement. Multiple inmates confirmed witnessing intimate contact between them during recent recreation periods. More significantly, a search of Terrell's cell uncovered a letter intended for Andre but never delivered. In it, Terrell explained the decision to end their relationship in favor of pursuing the connection with Calvin. The letter expressed gratitude for Andre's protection and affection, but cited the nearly 2-decade age difference and, Andre's eventual longer sentence as reasons for the change. "I need to think about my future outside," Terrell had written. "Calvin gets out the same year I do. We can have a life together. I'll always care about you, but I have to make this choice for myself." The letter, dated September 26, was found folded inside Terrell's journal. Whether Andre had somehow learned of its contents through the prison's information network became a central question in the investigation. Several inmates later claimed that Terrell had discussed the planned breakup with friends, making it likely that word had reached Andre before the fatal encounter. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to the systemic failures that had enabled the murder. The malfunctioning camera had been reported repeatedly over several days without repair. The decision to allow Andre access to the yard during another block's recreation period violated standard protocols. The weapon itself had been fashioned from facility infrastructure that should have been regularly inspected for integrity. Internal reviews identified at least 7 points where intervention might have prevented the tragedy. Staff reductions due to budget constraints had left critical positions unfilled. COVID-19 protocols had disrupted normal supervision patterns. Documentation of the increasingly obvious triangle between Andre, Terrell, and Calvin existed in multiple daily logs, but had never been elevated to the threat assessment team. Most damning was the discovery that Andre had been flagged for psychological evaluation following his disciplinary segregation, but had never been seen by mental health staff. The referral form was found, still pending, marked as non-urgent. These institutional failures became the focus of subsequent litigation as Terrell's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the State Department of Corrections. The suit alleged negligence in duty of care and failure to follow established safety protocols. The tragedy of this case is its predictability, the family's attorney stated in preliminary hearings. Every element was visible, documented, and ignored until it culminated in murder. Behind the clinical language of the investigation and legal proceedings lay the human reality of lives destroyed. Terrell Jackson, described by family as creative, resilient, and determined to rebuild a life after incarceration, had been just 3 years from potential parole. Personal effects collected from the cell included a notebook filled with designs for clothing Terrell hoped to create after release, along with course completion certificates from every educational program offered at both previous facilities and Ravencrest. For Andre Collins, the murder marked the final termination of any possibility of rehabilitation or release. His plea agreement to second-degree murder added a life sentence without possibility of parole to his existing term. Transferred to a maximum sedent facility in another state, he disappeared into the darkest corners of the carceral system. The third prisoner involved in this tragic triangle requested protective segregation following the murder. Eventually transferred to minimum security to complete his sentence, he provided key testimony about the relationship's progression, but maintained that he had never intended to come between Andre and Terrell. "I didn't understand what I was walking into," he told investigators. "In here, relationships aren't just relationships, they're survival, identity, everything all at once. I didn't see how serious it was until too late." The corrections officers and administrators involved faced varying consequences. 3 staff members were terminated for protocol violations. The warden took early retirement as the investigation concluded. The facility's operating procedures underwent comprehensive revision, with particular attention to surveillance systems and relationship monitoring. Today, Ravencrest Penitentiary continues its operation, the physical location of the murder now undetectable to new arrivals. The equipment shed was demolished and replaced with an open seating area fully visible from all angles. Additional cameras eliminated the surveillance gap. New signage reminds both inmates and staff about relationship violence warning signs and reporting procedures. Yet the institutional memory remains. Officers who worked that day still reference the Collins incident when training new staff. The love letter that triggered the initial official awareness of the relationship is preserved in the case file. Its faded ink and careful handwriting a poignant artifact of connection formed against all institutional barriers. In the broader context of prison violence, the murder represents more than just another statistic. It illuminates the complex intersections of identity, desire, institutional constraint, and human need. The relationship between Andre and Terrell, beginning in mutual support, evolving through genuine affection, and ending in violence, followed a trajectory shaped both by personal psychology and by the pressure cooker environment of incarceration. The facility's memorial garden, created as part of the settlement with Terrell's family, contains a small plaque with no name, just a date and the words "Remember Our Humanity." Most inmates passing by have no knowledge of its significance, but for those who lived through that period at Ravencrest, it stands as a silent reminder of how even in a system designed to control every aspect of human behavior, emotions remain ungovernable and sometimes deadly. As one long-term staff member reflected on the 5th anniversary of the incident, people outside think prison relationships aren't real because of the environment. What they don't understand is that in here, they're more real than anything. They're compressed, intensified. Everything that might take years to develop on the outside happens in months or weeks. The connections are faster, deeper, and when they break catastrophically. Andre and Terrell showed us that. I just wish the lesson hadn't cost a life. The case file remains in the state archives, its contents a detailed chronicle of love, jealousy, institutional failure, and ultimate tragedy. Among the evidence, photographs, crime scene diagrams, and witness statements lies the essential human story. A relationship that formed against all barriers, flourished briefly in the harshest environment, and ended in violence that reflected not just individual actions, but the systematic dehumanization that made such an outcome almost inevitable. In that sense, the murder at Ravencrest stands as both a personal tragedy and an indictment of a system that contains without healing, punishes without rehabilitating, and creates environments where human connection becomes simultaneously essential for survival and potentially fatal in its consequences. For more interesting crime stories, check this out.